The police command has arrested the most wanted armed robber Ataa Ayi this morning at his hideout in Teshi near Accra. The arrest of 32-year-old Ataa Ayi barely 2 weeks after the arrest of his second-in-command in Pata as Teba brings to rest the struggle of the police to get foothold of armed robbery in the country. According to the Greater Accra Regional Police Commander ACP Kofi Boachi, his arrest brings an end to a whole generation of armed robbers.
February 28, 2005. It has been almost 19 years since one of Ghana's most notorious armed robbers was captured by police after a 6-year-long search for him. His story does not make him a legend, but it is one that is of legend. There is so much more to the story of the man that we would come to know as Ataa Ayi. My name is John Andrew Addo, and dearly beloved, welcome to Mayhem. Our story on the man known as Ataa Ayi begins in the early 1970s in the town of Addo. I would like you to imagine this: Addo, a bustling suburb of Accra, a neighborhood full of life, where stories echoed through its winding streets. It wasn't just a location on the map. It was a living, breathing entity that had its own rhythm and energy. In this time period, Addo was a place where you could feel the echoes of traditional values and very close-knit relationships. Everyone knew everyone. Doors were left open, there were barely any walls between houses, and everyone would invite conversations and unity. Amongst his environs lived a little boy of school-going age. His name, Raymond Ayi Aite. He would attend the Radiant Way Preparatory School in Odoko and was the last of 8 children. However, upon reaching class 4, things would start to take a bit of a turn, as his mother would depart for the United Kingdom in search of greener pastures. This would lead him to stop schooling, as he could not afford school fees. With the passage of time and with his growth into adulthood, he would begin to pick up the skill attached to being a mechanic. This would lead him to becoming a taxi driver. The people that knew him back then would describe him as friendly, respectful, almost with every attribute of a regular taxi driver. But life was about to throw a curveball at him that he did not see coming. In 1998, upon his return from taking a passenger to Accra for a funeral, Raymond would find himself in an accident that totaled his vehicle. He would escape this accident with his life, but it would put him in a very precarious situation. He'd become jobless, he would be drowning in debt, as he now owed his master a full car, and his wife, at the time, was pregnant. He had seemingly reached the end of his rope, But little did he know that this accident would change his life forever. He would cross paths with a man who would offer him a way out, a chance to put food on the table for his pregnant wife, but the job description was not your typical 9 to 5. Imagine his surprise when he finds out that his new boss is into car burglary and the stolen car trade. It is not like Raymond jumped at this opportunity. He hesitated and he had reservations. But life's pressures can make you do some crazy things. Eventually, Raymond would join this gang of car burglary enthusiasts as the driver, and their target would be people who just stepped out of banks with pockets full of cash. On one of his first operations, they would rob a man of 12 million old Ghanaian cedis, an amount from which he would derive his first cut of 2.5 million Ghanaian cedis. At the time, it would do a lot for him, and he'd be motivated to carry on. But what's a heist without a little firepower? These guys didn't have guns until they stumbled upon one in a police vehicle. Something out of a movie, almost. This gang would gain momentum as they would begin to rob buses, hijack cars, and rumor had it that Raymond, now the infamous Ataa Ayi, had some sort of magical charm that protected him from bullets. Imagine being so good at driving that you could star in your own action movie. That was Ataa Ayi. It is said that he could reverse a car at breakneck speeds while being chased by the cops. And as the level of his infamy grew, billboards would be scattered across the city of Accra in search of him. But, as they say, all things must come to an end. In the course of a long manhunt for him, Ataa Ayi could only play the game of hide and seek for so long, eventually nabbed in his sister's house, caught in the act of drying clothes. Very anticlimactic end. The accumulation of several court sentences would lead him to spend 160 years in prison. And in what has seemed to be one of the biggest twists, Ataa Ayi, the mastermind behind countless crimes, now walks a different path as a Christian man in prison. Ataa Ayi's story almost resonates with one we've seen before in fiction, the story of Walter White, the protagonist of the Breaking Bad series. Walter White discovers he has cancer and only has a few years to live. And upon the realization that he has very limited time on this earth, with a baby on the way, with the help of a former student, he resorts to cooking crystal meth, which would net him millions of dollars, but he could not stop. He would even derive the name Heisenberg at one point and would be very infamous for producing very copious, high quality amounts of crystal meth. Eventually, he would come to an end as he would die almost very peacefully in a warehouse. Now that I think about it, could it be that the writers of Breaking Bad got some inspiration from the events of Ataa Ayi? Just putting it out there. You may never know. Now, as we do with this podcast, we dig, we find things. And something that jumped out to me very quickly was the general history of armed robbery in Ghana. I looked through crime rates, I looked through so many different articles, and I found some very interesting things. You see, petty thievery on its own has been a negative staple that has been interwoven in societies from the dawn of civilization, from the dawn of the human race. But in Ghana, armed robbery would only begin to pick up somewhere around the 1980s. Ironically, this would be around the period of the Ghana Must Go incident that brought several Ghanaian nationals back to the country. Seeing that some people did not find the greener pastures they were hoping for before they were sent back here, with no other alternatives, they would turn to crime. And as a countermeasure, people would start to build their walls with the addition of broken glass bottles at the very top in order to protect themselves from potential thieves and armed robbers. But these thieves would find a way around this. They would use these heavy CMB sacks or cocoa sacks and use them as a form of padding. What they would do is they would fill the sacks with sand and drape them over the walls and then use that to scale over the wall. Some of them, depending on the amount of sacks they had, would use them as stairs almost in order to hop over the walls and into the houses of people they sought to rob. And then there would be the introduction of the barbed wire fences, which would replace these broken glass bottles on top of walls. But once again, thieves and armed robbers would come up with a countermeasure. This time, they would use cement blocks and throw them with all the force they could muster at these barbed wire fences, effectively knocking them down, or in some cases, dividing and clearing a path through the fence for these armed robbers to find a way to hop over them. A lot of these barbed wire fences have also incorporated the use of electricity with a wire passing across the length of these fences. But the barbed wire fences would evolve into most of what we see now with the thin-lined electric fences on top of walls. Ataa Ayi, for the time that I was growing up, had so many different stories attached to him, especially after he was captured. There were stories of him wielding the talisman, which would enable him not only to dodge bullets, but would actually enable him to vanish right in front of policemen. One of the famous stories of him that I remember would be him running away from police before coming to a sudden stop and then stamping his feet 3 times on the ground before disappearing in plain sight in front of them. There were stories of how he would be sighted in a car and police would be tipped off. They would set up barriers, and as the said tip-off car would get to the barrier, Ataa Ayi would be nowhere to be found. There were even a few cheeky stories thrown out there that certain passengers would take a taxi, and because of their inability to pay for the fare, they would declare themselves as Ataa Ayi, which would cause the driver to flee the car in fear. However, to every joker, there is a Batman. And in this context, he would be none other than retired COP Kofi Boakye.
That's why we've been saying that armed robbery is a recidivist crime. And if the judiciary will help us to prosecute them early, then they will know that they are in jail and action from there on could be taken.
At the time, he was ACP, Assistant Commissioner of Police. He headed up the Greater Accra Regional Police Command, and there was a certain fire to him. You see, ACP Wache was so good at what he did in apprehending criminals that rumors surfaced that he actually held meetings with a lot of the top criminals in Accra at the time and would say something like, okay, I've given you a pass this once. The next time will be your last. But whenever the issue of Ataa Ayi cropped up, he always had one thing to say: Mamobo, I will catch you.
They can run and run and run, but they cannot hide.
And it is safe to say he stuck to his word. It was said that ACP Boache's command would get in these very heated gun battles with members of Ataa Ayi's gang, or his accomplices as it would be put. And it would be in these gun battles that members of the gang would be either killed or captured. And then 6 months before Ataa Ayi's arrest, they would actually arrest his then wife, named Elizabeth Imoro. And she would reveal certain things that were unknown. Elizabeth would reveal to police that she had met Ataa Ayi in 2001 when she was working at a walk-in Chinese restaurant in Circle. He would always come visiting, and they would establish a bond which would turn into love. She claimed that for a time she did not know about his criminal activities until he accompanied her to the funeral of her grandfather in the northern region. She would tell the police that after the funeral, she and Ataa Ayi would leave the funeral grounds, only to hear that minutes later, police had stormed the funeral scene. And it was in that moment where he would reveal everything about himself and also threaten to kill her if she ever disclosed his criminal ways to anybody, practically and effectively swearing her to secrecy. She would mention him having 2 cell phones which he would always make calls and receive calls on, which came across as a little suspicious to her, but she never inquired. There are a few things I remember from the day of his capture. Believe it or not, my school, which I attended at the time, was within a 5-kilometer radius of where Ataa Ayi was eventually caught, which was Nungwa Cold Store. So for a time, that place gained a certain level of infamy because it would seem as though people living around there did not know that Ataa Ayi was a man on the run. Many people would actually describe him as being respectful but antisocial and a man who seemingly had a temper. He had only moved there from Ashaiman 6 days prior to his arrest. It is said that on the day of his capture, Ataa Ayi would get into a heated argument with one of the tenants of his sister's family home, which is where he had come to stay. This would lead to him slapping this tenant, who would then go and report him at the Nungwa police station, which is not far from the Nungwa Cold Store area at all. This person reported it as an assault case, and based on the description of events and the demeanor of the person, the police officers felt compelled to follow this aggrieved tenant back to the family home. And many people have come to say that it seemed like such a trivial situation that did not require any police presence. And it is only until they get into the house and see a man hanging his clothes on the line that they realize that they are about to capture the most wanted criminal in Accra. Now, depending on who you ask, you will hear two different versions of how he was captured. In one version, he is said to have begged for mercy, asking the police officers not to kill him, and almost instantly admitting his crimes. The second version has gunshots, as people have said they remember hearing gunshots emanating from the area. There is a possibility that there is actually an amalgamation of both stories, where both things did happen. A few days after his capture, another story on Ataa Ayi would surface, this time from an ex-lover. This woman claimed to have dated Ataa Ayi in the late 1990s and would claim that Ataa Ayi had actually been first arrested in 1999 on suspicions of armed robbery. She would claim that upon her realization of who he truly was, she would end the relationship with him and would want nothing to do with him. But shortly after that, he would come to beg for her forgiveness and would ask to be re-engaged with her. He would say that he was suspected of armed robbery because he was contracted to cart items which he did not know were stolen. As that seemed to be a reasonable explanation, she would accept him as her lover once more, only to find out not too long after that he had outdoored a baby with another woman. You see, there are three things a Ghanaian woman can be certain of: death, taxes, and the fear of a Ghanaian man. But I digress. And ever since that time, she never wanted anything to do with him anymore. She would get married, have children, and would find him on a news bulletin 6 years later as the man that had been sought after for all of these years, to her shock and surprise. Even with everything I had come to know about the man we all call Ataa Ayi, I still found it very imperative to speak with someone with much more experience in the field of journalism, and someone who almost vividly remembers the events of that day. I spoke to the one and only Abu Isa Muni. My first question, I'd love you to share your experience being a reporter and a concerned Ghanaian at the time.
Okay, so the first time we heard the name Ataa Ayi, we were thinking probably it was a joke. I mean, it was just a rumor flying all over the place that there is a man who is dodgy and it's difficult to find him, but he's a chief armed robber. Not just a thief, but an armed robber.
Interesting.
So it was all rumors because I can't imagine any journalist at that time trying to meet him to interview him and ask him that, what, are you a thief or not? What time do you go and steal people? What do you do? I mean, he wouldn't answer. Maybe if you have a friend who also has another friend, this is to the third degree that knows him, and maybe they live in the same community, you can get snippets of ideas about who he is and how he operates. But here's the case. He appears not to operate during the day, except for the car snatching aspect of it, which happens daily or daytime, and they are not able to capture him. So I think my personal experience with Ataa Ayi's story was hazy from the beginning because we're not able to get in contact with him as a journalist, to get in contact with him and then ask him a few questions or try to know by just setting your physical eyes on him to see his demeanor, how he walks, what he does, and so on. So it's a bit difficult to recapture because even in his real days, we couldn't see him.
So it was almost like a myth become real.
Kind of. Even at some point, we were told that his real name was not Ataa Ayi, and that he had a real name. But we didn't know him, who he was. And he wasn't like a celebrity or a superstar who has just appeared and everybody will want to just catch a little view of him. His operations are not what he does within physical eyes. He will prefer not to be seen or noticed and then carry out his operations. It is the aftermath that we get to hear. Hey, Ataa Ayi has robbed this place. Hey, this Ataa Ayi has done this. Who is Ataa Ayi? You know. So it was a kind of a myth to us during our days. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a huge part of his mystique is some of the stories that surrounded him. What were some of the ones that you heard? Some of the rumors about him?
I think the first thing we heard was that he couldn't be killed. He has juju. He has juju. When you shoot him, I mean, it all turns, the bullet turns into water. So it doesn't do any, it will probably splash on him. So, and I mean, what would a splashing water do to? And the second thing is that we also heard that when he hits his body against the wall, he vanishes.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's so mysterious.
Right.
And if you are the type that believe in magic, then you probably will buy in. Or if you believe in juju. When we were young, we had a lot of things that were done by juju.
Of course.
And some of those things were what were being repeated. So it was difficult because you've heard it over and over. At least it catches up with you in a little way. There's some sense of believability in it. But you are unable to pin it down because with that kind of personality or person and his activities, you probably will want to see him being chased, being given a hot chase, and then he hits himself against a pillar, and that's it, he's gone. And then that will confirm your belief that, yes, the man had some magical powers.
Interesting.
Yes.
Right. So fast forward the day of his capture. Do you remember where you were when you first heard the news of his arrest?
If I remember the year
2005,
then I was the news editor for Peace FM and UTV.
Okay.
I was in the newsroom. So I was in the thick of events at that time. Yes, absolutely. And because we had heard over and over, then probably we would, as a news editor, we don't put so much belief in what we hear, except when we can establish the facts.
Right.
So I imagine around that time, we would be waiting to hear a police announcement or a press release saying Ataa Ayi had been captured. Because even before that announcement, there were several announcements that Ataa Ayi has been arrested, he's been caught, but the police never gave a word, they never said anything, which showed us that all those things were just fabrications. And therefore, his actual arrest, was really a shocker to us. And the police, I think most of us were not convinced that that is the real Ataa Ayi, because we didn't know him from anywhere. It is the police that is claiming they know him and they have arrested him. So now they had to prove beyond reasonable doubt to all of us that this is the Ataa Ayi. Because I even heard he had doubles and versions, people who looked like him. And they could do so many things.
Wow.
We even heard all those rumors. So really, even his capture, some of us still don't believe that he is a real Ataa Ayi unless he comes out. Unless he comes out to say, look, this is me. I committed this crime, this robbery. I took 6 million. I got 300 million from this and that and that and that. It is me. This is what I used the money for. And there will be evidence that, yes, these properties belong to the man called Ataa. He committed this robbery. And therefore, the name that was being associated with that crime at that time was really him.
Interesting.
So far, I'm not sure he has admitted to any of those crimes.
For the most part, there are some he says he did not commit, but he has been open in talking about some of the others that he has been behind.
So for me, the major ones that really defined his status as a chief criminal, we will still need the facts. He should come and convince us. Right. Even if he sells the story to a movie writer, I'm sure it's going to be a box office, big hit. We're waiting for that kind of thing, for him to be able to tell the story as it happened. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So about the doubles, it almost harkens back to me, a case, one of his numerous court cases after his capture in 2010, where one of his former accomplices on the stand says the man you know as Ataa Ayi has been dead for a long time, only for another accomplice to later come up and say, no, the real Ataa Ayi is the one in the box.
So you see, that kind of mystery still surrounds the man Ataa Ayi today. Unless, for me, we have to be convinced beyond reasonable doubts that indeed he did A, B, C, D, and he is Ataa Ayi. People from his community where he used to live in Addo will come and say, yes, this is his real name, but he is also known as Ataa Ayi, and he is the
man.
Yes, the mysterious man we've been looking for. If those things don't happen, there will still be mystery surrounding it, and the facts cannot be established.
Right. Okay. Mr. Mooney's account of events definitely does establish how much disbelief there was surrounding the figure of Ataa Ayi himself. Some very interesting revelations would also be made. Apparently, there was some efficacy to the claims of his talisman giving him certain abilities, but it was not what everyone thought it was. Ataa Ayi would confess that his talismans were intended to give him the ability to hide from police. It was said at the time that his juju man, named Ayane Boyeka, would actually pass away not too long before Ataa Ayi's capture. But before his death, he would actually warn Ataa Ayi that his cup was about to run full. And full did it run. The accumulation of several court cases, some in which he would rob amounts from preachers worth almost 6,000 new Ghana cedis, to even one heist where allegedly $62,000 was stolen by he and his crew, would eventually land him with a prison sentence accumulating up to 160 years. He also, in recent years, has come to reveal a lack of affinity for firearms, citing that he was just the driver. A lot of the crimes that he is said to have committed, he has no knowledge of. He would mention the fact that in the early days of his operation, whenever they would encounter a firearm, they would dispose it near radio stations and places where they seemingly would not be traced. He would also reveal that he never thought he would get caught, as the man who was placed on the billboards as Ataa Ayi, who was being sought after, was not him. That alone must have made him feel invincible. Today, he spends the rest of his sentence in Ankofo maximum security prison, where he is seemingly a changed man, a God-fearing man who believes the Bible is more than a myth, but something to be revered, a guide to a life behind bars. Ataa Ayi's story is one that will live on for generations, for after all, the evil that men do lives after them. And on this note, we end this chapter on the man known as Ataa Ayi. I do not do any of this alone. I have a producer, Deborah Jiffa McAfee, who is very instrumental in piecing these stories together and researching and looking for clues in places one would never look. And to her, I say thank you. I also want to thank you, dearly beloved, for coming with me on this ride. Before you leave, until our next meeting, stay safe, keep your doors locked, and never stop searching into the truths of this world. The Reaper is always watching. My name is John Andrew Addo. I serve as host, and this is Mayhem.